It began as a hushed conversation behind Kensington Palace walls, one that aides tried to downplay and courtiers quickly silenced. But the look on Princess Catherine's face as she exited that private meeting said everything the palace couldn't. Something was wrong, and it involved Charlotte. What was first dismissed as a rumor soon turned into a royal firestorm, now confirmed by the very people who fought to protect it. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. For weeks, whispers had drifted through royal circles, appearing and disappearing almost as quickly as they surfaced. Palace staff who had spent years navigating sensitive situations suddenly found themselves speaking in unusually cautious tones. Doors that were normally open remained closed. Conversations stopped the moment others entered the room. Even among trusted aides, there was a growing sense that something significant was unfolding behind the scenes. At first, many assumed it was simply another challenge connected to the demanding responsibilities of royal life. But those closest to the family knew this felt different. The atmosphere was heavier, the concern was more personal, and at the center of it all stood Princess Charlotte. According to sources familiar with the situation, a private meeting brought together Princess Catherine, Prince William, and senior advisors for discussions that were never intended to become public. What exactly was said remains closely guarded, but what happened afterward raised more questions than answers. Catherine emerged from the meeting carrying a level of emotion that few had seen from her before. Known for her composure and steady presence during even the most difficult moments, she appeared deeply affected by whatever news had just reached the family. Those who witnessed the aftermath described an unmistakable tension hanging over the day, as though everyone understood that a turning point had quietly arrived. As the hours passed, that tension only grew. Staff members noticed changes in routine. Schedules were adjusted, plans were reconsidered. Small details that might normally go unnoticed suddenly seemed impossible to ignore. Yet despite the speculation, palace aides remained determined to maintain silence. Their reluctance only fueled further curiosity. Why was so much effort being made to contain the story? What was so important that even trusted insiders appeared hesitant to discuss it? Later that evening, attention shifted toward a more private moment. Prince William was seen spending time with Charlotte, offering the kind of reassurance that only a father can provide during uncertain circumstances. Those close to the family noted a warmth and protectiveness that suggested this was far more than an ordinary conversation. Charlotte herself appeared unusually thoughtful. Though still young, she seemed to understand that something had changed. Something important. Something that directly involved her future. What makes this development even more intriguing is that several media insiders now claim signs of concern had been visible for weeks. Subtle changes in behavior, unexpected decisions, and moments that seemed insignificant at the time are suddenly being viewed through an entirely different lens. Looking back, many believe the clues were there all along. The family had simply hoped to keep them hidden for as long as possible. But the chilling truth wasn't just about the present. It was connected to a burden Charlotte never expected to carry. For most children, the future is a distant idea. For Charlotte, it suddenly became a reality. And the moment she understood what was being asked of her, the carefree world she once knew seemed to disappear overnight. The questions that had been quietly forming in Charlotte's mind after that unsettling evening could no longer be ignored. She had sensed the tension around her. She had noticed the guarded conversations, the worried expressions, and the unusual silence that seemed to follow her wherever she went. But sensing something was wrong and understanding it were two very different things. Now, as pieces of the puzzle slowly came together, Charlotte found herself facing a reality that few children her age could truly comprehend. The future was no longer an abstract idea discussed by adults behind closed doors. It had become something personal, something immediate, and something that carried consequences she was only beginning to understand. What made the situation so overwhelming was not a single conversation or a single revelation. It was the realization that her position within the royal family came with expectations that would continue growing as she grew older. For years, Charlotte had been able to enjoy moments of normal childhood within the protective circle created by her parents. Catherine and William had worked tirelessly to give their children stability, despite the pressures surrounding the monarchy. Yet there comes a moment in every royal life when the shield begins to lower and reality begins to emerge. For Charlotte, that moment appeared to have arrived far sooner than anyone had hoped. Sources close to royal circles suggest that difficult discussions were taking place about the responsibilities attached to her future role. These were not conversations about ceremonies or public appearances alone. They were conversations about duty, sacrifice, scrutiny, and the lifelong commitment expected from those born into one of the world's most famous families. Catherine understood those burdens perhaps better than anyone. She knew what it felt like to have every decision analyzed, every word examined, and every personal struggle transformed into public conversation. Explaining those realities to her daughter was not easy. In fact, it may have been one of the most painful challenges she had faced as a mother. Those closest to the family claim Catherine wrestled with finding the right words. How do you tell a young girl that her future may never entirely belong to her? How do you explain that privilege and pressure often arrive together? Reports suggest she wanted Charlotte to understand the importance of duty without feeling trapped by it. Yet even with the greatest care, some truths are impossible to soften. The responsibilities attached to royal life are real, and Charlotte was beginning to see them more clearly than ever before. Throughout these conversations, William reportedly remained focused on reassurance rather than fear. He knew that uncertainty could easily become overwhelming, especially for someone so young. Rather than allowing the future to feel like a burden, he encouraged Charlotte to see it as a journey she would never face alone. He reminded her that strength is not about carrying every challenge by yourself. It is about knowing where to find support when those challenges arrive. His words offered comfort, but they could not completely erase the questions now taking root in Charlotte's heart. As she listened, Charlotte also found herself compared, directly and indirectly, to previous generations of royals who had walked similar paths. Stories of duty, resilience, and sacrifice echoed through family history. Some had embraced their roles. Others had struggled beneath the weight of expectation. For the first time, Charlotte began to understand that being part of that legacy meant inheriting not only privilege but responsibility. The realization was both inspiring and frightening, and as those emotions collided within her, she found herself standing at the edge of a future that looked very different from the childhood she had always known. As Charlotte tried to process her future, Catherine found herself confronting memories she had hoped her daughter would never experience. Behind closed doors, Catherine carried a fear she rarely shared. It wasn't the public attention or the royal ceremonies that worried her most. It was the emotional cost that came with life inside the monarchy. As Charlotte struggled to make sense of the expectations suddenly unfolding before her, Catherine found herself revisiting memories she had spent years trying to keep buried. The concerns weighing on her heart were not born from headlines, public appearances, or the endless scrutiny that comes with royal life. Those were challenges she had learned to manage. What haunted her was something far deeper. It was the knowledge that life within the monarchy often demanded sacrifices that could never be measured by titles, privileges, or status. It demanded emotional resilience. It demanded strength during moments of isolation. And most painfully of all, it demanded that young people grow up far sooner than they should. Long before she became one of the most admired members of the royal family, Catherine had entered a world governed by tradition, expectation, and relentless public attention. She understood better than most how quickly ordinary moments could disappear once royal duty became part of everyday life. Over the years, she had worked tirelessly to create a sense of normality for her children. She wanted them to enjoy the freedoms she knew would not last forever. She wanted them to laugh without worrying about judgment, to make mistakes without fearing public reaction, and to experience childhood without constantly carrying the weight of their future responsibilities. Yet as Charlotte's questions grew more serious, Catherine could feel that protective shield beginning to crack. Reports from those familiar with the family suggest that Catherine's greatest concern was not whether Charlotte could handle future duties. She had complete faith in her daughter's intelligence, compassion, and strength of character. The real fear was what those duties might take away from her. Every generation of young royals has faced unique pressures, but the modern world has amplified those pressures in ways few could have imagined. Privacy has become increasingly rare. Personal struggles can become public discussions overnight. Every decision, no matter how small, can attract endless scrutiny. Catherine knew exactly how exhausting that reality could become. These concerns reportedly led to a series of emotional conversations between Catherine and William. Together, they faced questions with no easy answers. How could they prepare Charlotte for the future without overwhelming her? How could they teach her responsibility while preserving her confidence? How could they help her embrace her role without allowing it to define her entire identity? Those discussions often stretched far beyond practical decisions. They became deeply personal reflections about parenthood, duty, and the difficult balance between protecting a child and preparing them for the realities ahead. William shared many of Catherine's concerns, but he also recognized something that sometimes escaped them in moments of worry. Charlotte was stronger than they realized. Still, even his optimism could not erase the growing sign that the pressure surrounding her future was beginning to affect her emotionally. Subtle changes emerged. Questions became more frequent. Moments of uncertainty lingered longer than before. What had once felt distant now felt immediate, and Charlotte could no longer avoid thinking about what lay ahead. The situation carried echoes of previous generations. History was filled with stories of young royals, forced to navigate responsibilities larger than themselves. Some adapted with remarkable strength. Others struggled beneath expectations that seemed impossible to escape. Catherine had studied those stories, lived alongside their lessons, and learned from their consequences. That knowledge made her determination even stronger. She wanted Charlotte to inherit the best parts of royal life, while avoiding the emotional burdens that had troubled so many before her. Yet, despite every effort to protect her daughter, Catherine sensed something changing. Charlotte was no longer simply listening to conversations about her future. She was beginning to draw conclusions of her own. Quietly, privately, and far from the concerns of the adults around her, she was piecing together what her future might truly demand. And those realizations were leading her toward an emotional crossroads that no one had fully anticipated. But while Catherine wrestled with her fears, Charlotte was quietly reaching her own heartbreaking conclusions. Then came the moment no parent wants to witness. What began as a simple conversation suddenly turned emotional, and Charlotte could no longer hold back the feelings she had been hiding. The concerns that had quietly followed Charlotte for weeks were no longer something she could keep locked away. Up until that point, she had done what many young people do when faced with uncertainty. She listened, she observed. She tried to understand more than she revealed. While Catherine and William worried about protecting her from the pressures of the future, Charlotte had been carrying those pressures in silence, allowing them to grow heavier with each passing day. What her parents initially believed was quiet reflection was becoming something far more difficult. The questions surrounding her future were no longer simply making her curious. They were beginning to overwhelm her. The family discussion started calmly enough. There was no dramatic announcement, no sudden revelation. Instead, it was another attempt to talk openly about the changes taking place around them. Catherine and William wanted Charlotte to feel supported. They wanted her to know that she could speak honestly about her fears without judgment. For a while, Charlotte listened carefully, offering only brief responses. But beneath that calm exterior, emotions were building with remarkable force. Every reassurance seemed to remind her of another worry she had not yet voiced. Every conversation about strength made her question whether she possessed enough of it. Every discussion about duty forced her to think about the sacrifices that might lie ahead. Then everything changed. What had been carefully hidden behind polite smiles and quiet patience suddenly surfaced. Charlotte struggled to find the words at first. The emotions came faster than the explanations. Years from now, people may remember discussions about responsibility, legacy, and royal expectations. But for those closest to the family, the moment that mattered most was much simpler. It was the moment a young girl finally admitted how frightened she felt. Sources familiar with the family's private struggles suggest that Charlotte spoke openly about fears she had been carrying alone. She worried about disappointing people. She worried about living up to expectations she barely understood. Most painfully of all, she worried about the possibility of losing parts of herself while trying to become the person everyone expected her to be. These were not the concerns of someone thinking about ceremonies or public appearances. They were the concerns of a child trying to understand why her future suddenly felt so different from everyone else's. As the conversation continued, the weight of those fears became impossible to contain. Tears followed, not because Charlotte lacked courage, but because courage sometimes means allowing others to see your vulnerability. For Catherine, the sight was heartbreaking. Every fear she had been carrying as a mother suddenly felt real. The emotional cost she had worried about was no longer a distant possibility. It was sitting directly in front of her. Without hesitation, Catherine moved to comfort her daughter. The reassurances she offered came not from a princess or a future queen, but from a mother determined to remind her child that she was loved beyond titles, expectations, and responsibilities. William remained remarkably steady throughout the difficult moment. Although those close to the family suggest he was deeply affected by Charlotte's distress, He understood that his role was to provide stability when it was needed most. His calm presence became an anchor for both Catherine and Charlotte as emotions threatened to overwhelm the room. Yet something unexpected emerged from the pain. Instead of creating distance, the crisis brought the family closer together. Walls that had quietly formed through fear and uncertainty began to fall away. Conversations became more honest. Feelings became easier to share. For the first time in weeks, the burden was no longer being carried by Charlotte alone. But even as the family found strength in one another, it became clear that her tears had uncovered something far more profound than anyone had realized. Yet Charlotte's tears revealed something deeper, something that had been troubling her long before that conversation began. Royal history is filled with stories of duty, sacrifice, and expectations. As Charlotte looked back at those who came before her, she began to understand why so many had struggled beneath the weight of the crown. The emotional conversation that had left Charlotte in tears did not simply disappear when the moment passed. If anything, it opened a door that could no longer be closed. Questions that had once felt distant now demanded answers. Fears that had remained hidden beneath the surface were finally acknowledged. And as Charlotte slowly began to recover from that difficult evening, her attention turned toward something she had never fully considered before: the history of the family she belonged to, and the extraordinary lives that had come before her. For much of her childhood, royal history had existed as a collection of stories, traditions, and names connected to family gatherings and public ceremonies. But now those stories carried a different meaning. They were no longer tales from the past. They were reflections of the future that might await her. As Charlotte learned more about previous generations, she began to recognize a pattern that was both inspiring and unsettling. Again and again, she discovered individuals who had been called upon to place duty ahead of personal comfort, responsibility ahead of personal desire, and service ahead of certainty. Those realizations brought new perspective to everything she had been feeling. The pressures she faced suddenly seemed connected to a much larger legacy stretching back decades. There were royal children who had grown into leaders. There were others who had struggled under expectations they never fully chose. Some had found strength in their responsibilities. Others had spent years searching for balance. The deeper Charlotte looked, the clearer it became that life within the monarchy had never been as simple as it appeared from the outside. Catherine understood the importance of those lessons. Rather than shielding Charlotte from history, she began helping her understand it. Their conversations became less focused on fear and more focused on resilience. Catherine explained that every generation faces challenges unique to its own time. What matters is not avoiding those challenges, but learning how to face them without losing sight of who you are. It was a lesson Catherine had spent years learning herself, often under intense scrutiny and enormous pressure. One figure appeared repeatedly in those discussions: Queen Elizabeth. To Charlotte, she had always been a beloved great-grandmother and a towering presence within the family. But now Catherine encouraged her daughter to look deeper. Beyond the ceremonies and public image was a woman who had spent her entire life carrying responsibilities few could truly understand. Through periods of uncertainty, personal loss, and national change, Queen Elizabeth had remained committed to service. Her strength did not come from never feeling fear, it came from continuing forward despite it. That lesson resonated deeply. Charlotte began to realize that duty and happiness were not always enemies, but neither were they automatically friends. Finding balance required effort, wisdom, and patience. It required understanding that responsibilities could shape a person without completely defining them. This realization did not remove her worries overnight. The future still felt intimidating. The expectations surrounding her role remained enormous, yet something subtle had started to change. Where fear had once dominated her thoughts, understanding slowly began to take its place. She was beginning to see that her story was part of something larger than herself. Not a burden designed to limit her, but a legacy that offered both challenges and opportunities. The more she learned, the more aware she became of her place within that legacy. And with that awareness came a growing sense of purpose that had been missing before. Still, the road ahead remained uncertain. Questions lingered, doubts occasionally returned. The weight of expectation had not disappeared. But amid all the pressure and uncertainty, an unexpected source of strength was waiting to guide her. When Charlotte felt most uncertain, it was her father who stepped forward. And what William told her that evening would become one of the most important conversations of her young life. The days following's emotional breakthrough were filled with reflection. The questions that had once remained hidden were now openly acknowledged. And although the uncertainty had not completely disappeared, something important had changed. The burden she had been carrying alone was no longer hers to bear in silence. Catherine had offered comfort. History had provided perspective. Yet there was still a void that needed to be filled. Charlotte needed reassurance from someone who understood not only the pressures of royal life, but also the reality of growing up beneath expectations that could sometimes feel overwhelming. That was when William chose to speak from experience rather than authority. Unlike many of the conversations that had taken place before, this one was not centered on responsibilities, traditions, or the future. Instead, it focused on something far more personal. William understood that Charlotte did not need another lesson about duty. She needed honesty. She needed to hear from someone who had stood exactly where she was standing now. Someone who had faced uncertainty, doubt, and the challenge of growing up while the world watched every step. Those close to the family suggest William spoke openly about his own journey. He did not pretend that royal life was always easy. He did not hide the moments when expectations felt heavy or when responsibility seemed larger than he was prepared to handle. Instead, he acknowledged those struggles with remarkable sincerity. He explained that strength is not something people are born with. It is something they build through difficult moments, one challenge at a time. Every obstacle he faced had shaped him. Every setback had taught him something valuable. And every fear he once carried had eventually become something he learned to overcome. For Charlotte, hearing those words from her father carried enormous weight. For the first time, the future no longer seemed like an impossible mountain standing directly in front of her. Instead, it became a path that others had walked before. A difficult path, certainly, but not one she would have to navigate alone. William made that point clear. No matter what responsibilities awaited her, she would never face them by herself. Her family would stand beside her. Her parents would support her. And whenever doubt appeared, she would always have people ready to help carry the weight. That message began to change something inside her. The fears that had dominated her thoughts for so long started to loosen their grip. They did not vanish entirely, but they no longer felt all-consuming. Hope slowly began replacing uncertainty. Confidence started emerging where worry had once lived. Charlotte began to realize that strength does not mean having every answer. Sometimes strength means trusting the people who believe in you when you are struggling to believe in yourself. Throughout the conversation, Catherine remained quietly present. For her, the exchange represented something far greater than reassurance. It was a powerful reminder of the family they had worked so hard to build. Despite the pressures surrounding them, despite the expectations and public attention, moments like this revealed what truly mattered. Titles, traditions, and responsibilities all had their place. But family remained the foundation beneath everything else. As William continued speaking, Charlotte listened with a level of focus that surprised even those closest to her. The uncertainty that had clouded her outlook was gradually being replaced by something stronger: determination, understanding, perspective. For the first time since the worries surrounding her future began to emerge, she could imagine moving forward without fear controlling every thought. The challenges ahead remained real, but they no longer seemed impossible. And while the world outside continued to speculate about palace matters, completely unaware of the emotional journey unfolding within the family, Charlotte quietly began taking her first steps toward a new chapter. For the first time since hearing the news, Charlotte could see a path forward, but the public still had no idea what the family had endured behind closed doors. While speculation continued outside palace gates, a very different story was unfolding within them. A family that had been shaken by uncertainty was now drawing closer together than ever before. From the outside, very little appeared to have changed. Rumors continued to circulate. Questions continued to be asked. Observers searched for clues, attempting to understand what had caused such concern within the royal household. Yet behind the walls that separated public curiosity from private reality, a far more meaningful story was taking shape. The fear that had once threatened to divide emotions and create distance was slowly being replaced by something stronger. The family was finding its footing again, and at the center of that transformation stood Charlotte. The emotional breakthrough that had left everyone shaken ultimately became the turning point they needed. For weeks, uncertainty had dominated conversations. Worry had lingered in every discussion about the future. Now, however, the atmosphere was beginning to shift. The concerns had not disappeared, but they were no longer carrying the same power. By speaking openly about her fears, Charlotte had given her parents something invaluable: the opportunity to understand exactly what she was struggling with. In return, Catherine and William became more determined than ever to ensure she never felt isolated by those burdens again. Sources close to the family suggest that the days which followed were marked by countless private moments of reassurance. These were not grand gestures or dramatic declarations. Instead, they were the small acts that often carry the greatest meaning. Conversations became more frequent. Questions were met with patience rather than uncertainty. Whenever doubts emerged, they were addressed rather than avoided. Slowly but surely, Charlotte began to understand that strength does not come from facing challenges alone. It comes from knowing that support exists even during the most difficult moments. Catherine remained especially focused on helping her daughter regain confidence. Having witnessed Charlotte's emotional struggle firsthand, she understood how important this period would be. Rather than allowing fear to shape the narrative, she encouraged Charlotte to focus on her own growth. She reminded her that nobody expects perfection. Every generation learns through experience. Every individual faces moments of uncertainty. What matters is the willingness to keep moving forward despite those doubts. Those lessons resonated deeply because they came not from royal tradition, but from a mother's unwavering belief in her child. William's influence was equally important. The conversations that had offered Charlotte hope was not a single event. It became the foundation for a new understanding between father and daughter. He continued reinforcing the message that challenges were not signs of weakness. They were opportunities to discover resilience. Over time, Charlotte began carrying herself differently. The uncertainty that once clouded her thinking was gradually being replaced by a growing sense of determination. The future remained demanding, but it no longer felt impossible. Those closest to the family reportedly noticed subtle changes. Charlotte became more willing to discuss her thoughts openly. She asked thoughtful questions rather than avoiding difficult topics. Most importantly, she began viewing her future through a different lens. Instead of seeing only pressure and sacrifice, she started recognizing purpose and opportunity. The responsibilities that had once frightened her now appeared less like obstacles and more like challenges she could eventually learn to navigate. That transformation did not happen overnight. There were still moments when uncertainty returned. There were still questions without clear answers. But unlike before, those moments no longer controlled her outlook. A renewed sense of stability was taking root within the family. Trust had grown stronger. Communication had improved. The emotional storm that once seemed overwhelming was finally beginning to lose its intensity. As that stability returned, something remarkable happened. Charlotte started discovering a level of maturity that surprised even those closest to her. The fears that had once left her in tears were gradually becoming sources of motivation. She was learning that courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is the decision to keep moving forward despite it. And as the storm finally began to settle, Charlotte found the courage to embrace what once frightened her most. The tears that shocked those closest to her would not define Charlotte's story. Instead, they became the beginning of something far more powerful, a transformation that revealed the strength quietly growing within her all along. In the weeks that followed, something remarkable began to happen. The fears that had once seemed overwhelming no longer occupied the center of Charlotte's thoughts. They had not disappeared completely, but they had changed. What once felt like a threat now felt like a challenge. What once brought uncertainty now encouraged reflection. The emotional journey that had started with confusion, worry, and heartbreak was gradually leading her toward a new understanding of herself. And for the first time since everything began, Charlotte was no longer looking at the future with fear alone. She was beginning to face it with courage. The transformation was not sudden. It came through countless conversations, moments of reassurance, and lessons learned from those who loved her most. Every difficult discussion had left an impression. Every story about resilience had strengthened her perspective. Slowly, she started accepting some responsibilities cannot be avoided. Some challenges arrive whether we feel prepared for them or not. The real test is not whether those challenges exist. The real test is how we choose to respond when they arrive. Charlotte was beginning to understand that truth in a way that few people her age ever could. For Catherine, watching this change unfold was deeply emotional. There had been moments when she worried that the pressure surrounding Charlotte's future might become too heavy. She had spent countless hours questioning whether she was doing enough to protect her daughter from the difficulties that come with royal life. Yet now she was witnessing something extraordinary. She was watching Charlotte grow stronger because of those challenges rather than being defeated by them. The pride she felt was impossible to hide. Not because Charlotte had all the answers, but because she was showing the courage to keep moving forward despite the uncertainty. William felt a similar sense of confidence. Throughout the family's difficult period, he had never stopped believing in his daughter. Even during her most emotional moments, he saw qualities that convinced him she would find her way through the storm. Compassion, intelligence, determination. Those qualities had always been there, quietly waiting beneath the surface. Now they were becoming impossible to ignore. The more Charlotte embraced her future, the more William became convinced that she possessed the strength necessary to navigate whatever lay ahead. The experience changed the entire family. What began as a period of concern ultimately brought them closer together. Difficult conversations had created deeper trust. Shared struggles had strengthened emotional bonds. Challenges that once felt isolating became opportunities for connection. Instead of allowing fear to divide them, they had faced it together. In doing so, they discovered a resilience that would continue serving them long after the crisis itself had passed. Perhaps the most important lesson was one that extended far beyond Charlotte alone. It was a reminder that duty and resilience are not built during easy moments. They are forged during periods of uncertainty. They emerge when people choose courage over fear, hope over doubt, and unity over isolation. Charlotte's journey had become a reflection of that truth. The tears that once seemed like a sign of weakness were now understood for what they truly were: the first step towards strength. As the future stretched out before her, Charlotte no longer saw only expectations and pressure. She saw opportunity. She saw purpose. She saw the chance to grow into her role while remaining true to herself. There would undoubtedly be challenges ahead. There would be moments of difficulty, setbacks, and uncertainty. But there would also be triumphs, lessons, and opportunities to prove just how much she had grown. What began as a whispered concern behind palace walls ultimately became a story of courage, family, and a young princess discovering the strength that would shape her future. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.